So hello again. It's the beginning of a new week, and I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Michael Ivy. To think about your name there for a minute. Ah, dear, it's been a good
Good
weekend.
friend.
Yeah, definitely good friend. So, Mike, a friend of mine was watching a program called Carte Blanche, which is a program on your television. It's not over here in the UK, and he sent me some quotes, and these two quotes really stuck into my heart, and I thought I'd like to throw them at you, and it'd be good just to kick them around. So I'm just going to read them from my book here. The first one is this: is that life expands and shrinks in direct proportion to our courage. Life expands and shrinks in direct proportion to our courage. And then the second quote was this one: everything that you ever wanted is on the other side of fear. Everything you ever wanted is on the other side of fear. And what I liked about the quotes were this interplay between courage and fear. Courage and fear. And courage is often seen as the opposite to fear. Brene Brown, I know you've read a lot of Brene Brown. She's a favorite in this household. Has done this huge expose on the word courage and the need to take courage. She also talks about, and you might remember, how she doesn't. She says we need to have fear in our life. Fear is what keeps us safe. It tells us to be cautious about something. But she says sometimes fear wants to take the steering wheel. And she says, no, fear, your place is in the back seat. You know, you're there to remind me not to go too fast down the road or to take the corner carefully. But your job isn't to take the direction of my life. And so you almost got this mental picture of courage being at the front with the steering wheel and fear being in the back, just bringing some caution. So I wanted to throw that out, the role of courage and fear in your life, in our lives, getting the balance right between over courageous, so it becomes dangerous, or not having enough courage, so fear is controlling. How's that for a start?
Yeah. Look, I think it's really good. Liz Gilbert's also played beautifully with the term fear, and also that analogy of fear being almost his personality. I think the big thing for me about fear. So your first quote, and I can't remember exactly how the words goes, but I think the danger of fear is paralysis. So fear can stop us from actually moving, and I think that's the part of fear that we most need to be wary of. Is it can actually cause me to just stay stagnant and not do anything. I think the other big thing about fear for me is although fear and courage could maybe be on opposite ends of the spectrum, courage seldom takes place without courage doesn't take place in the absence of fear. Courage is often moving forward. And
fear.
yeah, I think it's C.S. Lewis, but I might have it wrong. But he uses the imagery of your knees and your legs shaking together, but still moving forward. So, or it could have been G.K. Chesterton. I'm not sure, one of those guys. But so what we don't want to do is, when it comes to fear, create something of shame. You know, where I'm shameful because I'm fearful. I think every single one of us who are going through coronavirus at the moment have moments of fear. You know, where you do wake up and you feel paralyzed, and that's the part you want to try and avoid. But it's not to be ashamed of fear, but it's to keep moving forward in spite of fear. And I think those two things are often together.
I love the word that you used, shame. You brought the word shame into this because I think shame and fear are very connected, and a lot of people never deal with their fears because they never talk about their fears, because shame becomes the lock or the prison in which holds them in. And I think a lot of fear is abated or certainly dissolved or reduced by just sharing it and talking it. You know, I'm afraid of, I fear this when, but being able to say it without any sense of shame or failure, or it makes me a lesser person. I think the more we talk about our fears, the better. I think the whole adage of taking something out of darkness and bringing it into the light and letting the light shine upon something usually dispels it, or certainly puts things in a different perspective. Many times in my life, I feared something, and eventually when I brought it out in the open, someone's brought another perspective, and the fear is completely gone, and I've seen it in a different light.
Yeah. I think, we spoke last week about being with the people you're at, but a great person to be with at the moment, which could be at home or could be you and me, like 6,000 miles away. But it's the ability to say to somebody, hey, I'm feeling a little bit shaky today, but I don't want you to join me in my shakiness. Can you help me walk through this? Because I want to act in a very, very courageous way. So so courage is definitely not the absence of fear, but it's moving through and in spite of that fear. I love the question, and there's two ways we could throw this question, but it's a very movement or motion question. What would you do if you weren't afraid? So, and then you could add a bit of an even better question to that, or statement, which would be, what's worth doing even if you do fail?
Yes.
So you think of it, fear is definitely related to probably things such as failure, things such as image, how will people perceive me, and then fear probably related to just our basic living, food to eat and to be able to. But there's something very, very powerful to move us forward, which says let's just make fear and sort of like an attachment, and then what would I do if I didn't have that attachment?
Yes.
Um,
I think there's a guy called Rick Warren years ago. He's a famous pastor in the States. He said, what we need to do is we need to readdress, or we need to re-understand fear. Fear is not falling over. Fear is the refusal to get back up. Failure is not falling over. Failure is the refusal to get up, and I think, a lot of fear is based in failure. This sense of, I don't want to fail. I don't want to fail. And like failure, we make failure to be something that's so big that, it's completely destructive, etc. And that's not the case. A guy called Tom Peters in the 80s wrote a book called Circle of Innovation, a brilliant business book. And he said that unless we are failing, then we are certainly not moving forward, or we're not even attempting to move forward. And he likens the need for courage and failure go together. That actually, he says, we need to be having lots of little failures in our lives that are actually teaching us and bringing us new things. So we got to get better at dealing with the word failure and actually not seeing it as a negative thing and thinking a positive thing. And so there is a nice way of bringing courage into these decisions. I'm having the courage to do something, even though I may well fail, but that failure is not a bad thing. It's part of my moving forward. Would you agree?
No, I agree with you totally. So I think when we're feeling fear, we spoke about this, I think, last week or the week before, we probably need to go to root issues. And so what's underneath this fear? Because would you be right? Would I be right in saying fear is probably more a fruit? But what's underneath the thing of the fear? And so failure could be one of those things that are underneath. I'm so worried that I'm going to fail. Yep. I'm so worried that I'm not going to be able to survive this. And sometimes what we fear, we are over amplifying. And when we can sort of go beneath the root, because fear begins to cause us to go down a spiral where we're not going to have broader vision. But by identifying what's beneath the fear, we're probably going to be able to then deal with it. Because we might find that what we're fearing is actually
it's what happens when you bring fear into the light. You then you're then enabling the ability to ask it questions. Why do I feel this way? Why is it so impinging on me? Why do I feel so disabled by it? That whole sense of, we've got to be able to handle, what is this thing coming from? Where are the roots in this thing? So definitely bringing something into the light is important.
Yeah, and to me, Davey, fear is often it's worrying about tomorrow, and we spoke about being more in the present, so more about this day. What are my needs for this day versus the needs for the future? Now, and I know this is a very tricky one because we do have to be careful about planning for the future, but if we can begin to focus more on what we need this day, and there's a couple of famous quotes. I can even think of a couple of scriptures which just take us back to about not worrying about tomorrow, because you don't actually have control of tomorrow. So sometimes, when we're feeling fear, it might be speaking, that root underneath might be speaking to an overemphasis on something in the future that I have no control of,
right,
versus what is I'm going to do today. I love the movie Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino.
I knew that movie was going to come up.
Yeah. And you've heard me share about it, but it's just so relevant here. And there's a beautiful scene where Frank Slade, Al Pacino, is in that upmarket restaurant, and he smells the fragrance of the beautiful perfume. He asks Charlie, tell me about her, and they go over to this woman. There's an interesting conversation that takes place, but he then gets on the dance floor, and he's like fearless. Now we can sort of, it's just a movie, so we've always got to be careful, but why can he be so fearless? And there's a bit of a dark side to this one, because he doesn't have to worry about tomorrow because of his wicked plan to just to end his life. But there is something powerful about the person who is so living for today and not necessarily for all the concerns of tomorrow. They sort of say a guy in battle has to, it's a bit of an irony, he has to so love his life, but he has to so be prepared to give up his life in order to sort of survive, to run in. And the moment we're trying to protect is when we're probably in that very, very vulnerable state. So it's this interesting thing of focusing more on today than tomorrow, whilst I realize we do need to have connections with tomorrow, because we're one day going to get old, or some of us will get there.
Something that we're talking a lot about is actually the word thinking. You're familiar with that phrase that, what he feared came upon him. There's this sense that it's actually, the data is out there that if you focus on your fear, if that becomes all consuming, and you just keep talking about your fears, you keep thinking about them, then quite often it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You actually, it actually changes the way you act, your behaviors, and you end up fulfilling the very thing that you fear. So I think that with the next route down to dealing with fear is dealing with our thought life, how we think, which is what you were saying. So again, there's a scripture, isn't there, that says, as a man thinketh, so he is. And it's about firstly learning to train our thinking to becoming more positive, having this thing of, which steps us in line with courage. I believe courage is the result, or is the fruit of well thought out or good thinking. Bringing good thinking into your body starts to energize courage. I know that I've got this speech to do, so I'm going to start preparing my body and my mind and my emotions around doing this speech, so that when the time comes, I have courage. Start seeing courage as a fruit of changing our thinking.
Yeah. And on that thinking side, one of the good ways to change your thinking is to provide evidence for what it is that you most need. So if you're in a particular situation and you're sort of saying, sure, am I going to survive this? Find evidence of stories of people who were in a similar situation to you, and they survived.
False your thinking, right? Because false evidence appears real. Well, then bring evidence that to the contrary. To deal with it.
So it begins to deal with that fear, where sometimes what happens in our fear is, without us realizing it, we're naturally finding all the arguments or the evidence that supports the fear. And so then it's like just takes us down, because there's clarity on our fear having a certain outcome. But when we find evidence that suggests that what it is that we're fearing need not be taking us down that path, it enables us to then to act in a way that begins to move against that fear. So we need, that's why we need to be sharing stories of hope. stories of people stepping up and doing great things. There's stories of people who survive. We should be putting them out there, and there are so many, and not just listening to the evidence that's supporting the fear and feeding the fear.
I love that.
So we need to think of things that are good, wholesome, lovely, beautiful. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think to come back to that quote right at the beginning, everything you ever wanted is on the other side of fear. I think, to start saying, okay, let's go back to think about all of those things that I am wanting, I am chasing. And let's push through that barrier called fear by changing our thinking, and then having courage for the future. One of the things maybe we can talk about in another podcast is learning to dream again. Because I think one of the things about this lockdown is we're starting to lift our heads about, okay, what's it going to be like the other side of this lockdown? Maybe this is the time for us to start dreaming again, start thinking about, well, someone's almost given us a new piece of paper. What could we do with that new piece of paper? If fear wasn't a part of that, if we could do everything without worrying about failure, what would we write down on that piece of paper?
Yeah. And I think I'd love to go there with you, and just maybe make that the next few sessions is just around reimagination, because if we can reimagine, it definitely becomes the motion for us. So, for me, almost like a summary would be: fear is going to be there. Don't shame yourself on it. But the way to move through fear, and just with you saying that quote again, it's like, that really is good, because he's not suggesting that there won't be fear. He's suggesting we have to go through it.
Yes.
But the way through fear is we have to be in a place of motion. We have to be moving forward. Fear consumes us when we're standing still.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very good. Mike, it's been a great podcast. So let's do that. We'll pick up the next one talking about dreaming, how to reimagine our life, our world, our families, ourselves, and all of those good things. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and hope you've enjoyed it.